You are in 3CX lesson learned. Hit it, please. And we're going to go ahead and talk about it. At first, we're going to introduce Matt Reynolds. Matt. So we work for a company called Reversing Labs. What we do is let you basically trust your software. 3CX, what we'll talk about was something that is ongoing, right? Matt and I can help you. Next slide, please, Tom. All right. I hate doing this, but I'm doing it. This is me. This is mine. This ain't my company's. This isn't LastCon speaking. This is me. Okay? Thank you. We are in booth 12. Look for me. I'll be wearing the hat. I usually do. Look for the bald guy. Right? All right. Nope. Go back, please. Yeah. Tomorrow, so Dave Ferguson is talking tomorrow. If you know anything about AppSec, you may have heard the story of the guy who coached Netflix on their session problem that saved them millions of dollars. That's Dave Ferguson. He's been doing this for a long time. He's pretty damn good at it. And he's talking tomorrow. And I'm going to touch a little bit on what he's doing, but not very much. You need to be there. Friday, tomorrow, Matt Rose is going to talk about why SCA is almost good enough. Next slide, please, Tom. All right, we're going to move fast. This is the agenda. Next, Tom. All right. Okay, who am I? I'm a born-again United States Marine. My name's Andy Lewis. So if this sounds like somebody dropped a revival tent into a boot camp graduation, you're in the right place. I'm that guy. I founded the Denver and Boulder OWASP chapters. I founded Snowfrock, which is a lot like LastCon. We've had Matt talk there. It's like LastCon, but it's got altitude. I founded a Colorado, whatever. I did a bunch of stuff. And I was a big shot at small, big companies, whatever. Now I'm a solutions architect, and I raise bees. So that's me. That's who you're listening to. I'll pause for a second so that anybody who wants to leave can just go. Just go. All right. Next slide, please. All right. Let's go to the prequel 3CX. Next slide, please. So I think to understand what's going on in terms of the risk. So I used to drive a truck. One of the things that makes sense to me, is there anybody who doesn't know what an S-bomb is? Come on in. Hey, we saved the front seat for you. Anybody who doesn't know what an S-bomb is? Yeah, you guys are lying. Yeah. So, very nice. Very nice. So the easiest way to talk about it, I think, in terms of what is it, used to drive truck. Every load I've got a manifest. As a driver, I don't care about the manifest. I don't care. I'm going to sign it because I've got a load. But when do I care? Well, sometimes if you've got to go through a port of entry, you got to produce your manifest along with your logs, and guess what? You care. The paperwork's got to be right. Also, when I'm delivering, if the manifest is wrong and the customer doesn't accept it or the receiver doesn't accept it, now we got a problem. The other time, though, is safety. If I'm talking to my dispatcher and they say, hey, by the way, we're trying to figure out which load is full of, explosives, and it might be yours. Let's talk. Let's talk about what's supposed to be in my truck. You guys with me? All right. And so how does that relate to software? So if you think about this, think about that as it's a load of EVs, right? I've got the manifest. It says I've got a full load of EVs. Don't care about it. I'm going to drive them because that's what I do. When do I care about them? When somebody figures out that some batteries in some EVs are actually tampering with the system in the car to make it a killer car, well, that's a problem. Or that some of those batteries might catch fire. Now I care, right? So same thing, if I've got log4j in my release and it's a highly vulnerable version, I've got a problem. I care. That's a safety issue. By the same token, If I'm developing and I've pulled down an NPM package that is Trojaned inside and out, I care. That's a safety issue, right? So when we talk about an SBOM, it's important to understand what's on the truck and at the right time, understand what that means to me, right? Then any questions about that? Did I lose anybody? Okay, good. Next slide, please, Tom. All right. So let's talk about dinosaur days. I qualify. I was there. Matt was there. So if I say worm wars, does that mean anything to anybody? Yeah. Back in the worm wars, right? So way back in the day, the fun was write malware that would replicate and that you could thump your chest about, and you were the biggest, baddest malware writer in the world. Didn't make a dime from it, but you wrote it, and it was cool. And it would replicate and rip around the world. So MS-02-039 is the core vulnerability for SQL Slammer, what became SQL Slammer. A guy named David Litchfield published it at Black Hat or DEF CON, I don't remember which, and said, hey, this is going to be really bad. And people at the time did what? Said, that Dave gave a great talk. We're not going to do anything about it, but man, that was a good talk, right? So bottom line is that when that hit, South Korea went dark. The amount of traffic that thing spewed caused high bandwidth lines everywhere to get saturated. So the transmission rate for that worm was 45,000, I think there were 17K packets, 45,000, 17K packets a second. And so you'd have one that would spew, it'd find another one, and what would that one do? They'd get infected and spew. That's a worm. It's super cool. Right? So that was the high watermark of the worm wars, guys. That was it. And one of the things that's really interesting is, we'd been through all of this. Microsoft finally said, you know what, we ought to put firewalls in the operating system. Hey, good idea. And the worm wars kind of went away, right? But the Microsoft SQL Server team, who in here is new to AppSec? Okay, all right. So you can do AppSec wrong. If you want to know somebody that's doing it right, the Microsoft SQL Server team, after they got mightily roasted, if you look at their CVEs since then, you could count them on one hand, maybe two. They turned it around. They do their thing, and they do it right. And it started with them being mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. All right, next slide, please. Any questions so far? Are you guys tracking okay? All right, good. All right, the rest of the dinosaur stuff. So before 2003, OWASP was an acronym that a lot of people thought, hey, maybe that's an Irish insect. I don't know. But PCI rolled it into their standards. And now OWASP is meaningful. 2006, you start to see things like, we're getting a handle on this application security. We've got a firewall. Might be a disconnect there. 2016, Snowfrock that year, the theme was 10 years of injection. It was great. And then in 2020, if I say sunburst, did I lose anybody if I say solar winds? All right, good. Then, so you had your Christmas ruined in 2020 if you had solar winds anywhere near you. But that was okay because there was always Christmas of 2021, right? And so we've gone from 2020 where, hey, there is something on the truck that is reaching out and shooting passersby, right? And then 2021, hey, there's something on the truck that is going to catch fire and burn if somebody looks at it wrong. That's kind of that history. So in 2021, government, of course, here to help. Thou shalt SBOM. You bet. Because documentation always solves security problems. 2022, SolarWinds, right? Really 2019, I think, is when it happened and was reported in 2020. 2022, who are these guys, right? What's going on with them? Same play on 2. 2023, 3CX, that's what we'll talk about. Next slide, please, Tom. Okay, one more up. Told you I'm born again, so there is nothing new under the sun. This is from writings that are, 5,000 years old? There's nothing new under the sun, guys. Next slide, please. Or you could put it like this. It's frickin' Groundhog Day. Next slide, please. All right, so let's get into the weeds a little bit. So this started out, 3CX, y'all, is there anybody that follows their boards? Is there anybody that participates on their forums? These guys are cool. I mean, they have made a community that's really cool. Tragically, the other side of that is when there's an issue, somebody gets to hold up their hand and go, hey, I think this stuff's kind of broken. Something's wrong, right? And somebody held up their hand. One of the other things that led up to this, we'll talk about it a little bit more. There's a CVE from 2013 that's a big deal in this whole thing. And then it's a big enough deal that Microsoft republished the CVE in 2022 and then updated it this year. Next slide, please. All right. So this is kind of where it starts. Remember, they've got a community. It's super cool. And there's a guy, threat alerts from Sentinel-1 for desktop. Hey, is anybody else seeing this issue? What do you think happens? What happens if you're writing code and the antivirus software on somebody's desktop says it's malware? What happens? It's a false positive. Everybody knows it's false positive. Hell, that's a false positive. I know it's a false positive. How would I know? Well, I'd put it up on VirusTotal. Wouldn't I? Isn't that's part of my response, right? I mean, I've got an update and I've got one vendor who says, hey, this stuff's polluted. Yeah, but I've got 40 other vendors that say it's not. So it can't be polluted, right? Okay, so what ensued, if you follow this thread, and I've got some Google strings at the end of this talk so that if you want to follow the thread, you can. If you follow the thread, it's, hey, I think Sentinel-1 is telling me this stuff's polluted and very bad for me. And further down the thread, you got various degrees of, hey, VirusTotal says they're wrong, and here's how you whitelist it. So if you want a Trojan to update to really sink in, what's the best way to do it? Go ahead and whitelist it. Next slide, please. About a week after that, CrowdStrike weighed in and said, we've done the full analysis, and this thing is, in fact, polluted. And you can see, we'll talk more about this guy, Nick Galea, later on in the talk, but you can see he's the CEO, he's top dog in the organization, comes out on his users forum and says, hey gang, you know what, there is a problem. Okay, more about that later. Next slide, please. All right, next slide. Yeah, there it is. This is, I think, this is a good article to read. It came out after Nick Galea had about 5 full days without sleep, right? No doubt. And you can see it's the register. They tested it. There's no malware there. They tested it. VirusTotal says there's no malware there, right? Even though the user said, hey, there's a problem, right? Well, golly, if you really rip that thing apart, you come to learn that, yeah, there's a problem, right? And then again, hey, we checked it on VirusTotal. We checked it twice. Sentinel-1, those guys are smoking crack. Bottom line, right? Okay, next slide, please. So that's what happened. Are there any questions about what happened? Okay, is there any question about who the hero is and who the villain is right now? That's one of the villains. Yeah. Right. So if you haven't been through it, think about that. Think about this. You've built a community for well over a decade. You've got software that does good stuff for customers all over the world. And somebody contaminated your pipeline so that your product is a Trojan. That's a problem. That's a bad day. Any questions about any of that? Okay, good. Is that a news flash to anybody? Is there anybody who hadn't heard that story before? Okay, good. All right, yeah, and this guy's behind it, we think. Next slide, please. Man, that guy's ugly. All right. I'm going to pause here for a second. This is what we'll talk about going through this. So hopefully nothing's missing because this is what we're going to talk about. All right, next slide, please. And Tom, you're doing a great job, buddy. All right, antivirus is death. That's lesson 1A. You can't live without it, but it's going to kill you. Why? So first bullet, when nobody has assessed this, when nobody has a hash, it doesn't have a reputation, right? So nobody knows to say it's bad. The other thing that comes up, and this is a big deal. By the way, Reversing Labs malware analysis is one of our things because everybody in the marketplace does this. They fail open. Hey, the first 60 meg are clean. It's a 250 meg update, but I'm pretty sure it's clean since the first 60 are. Big thumbs up on your 3CX update, right? That's how every antivirus vendor you can think of works by default. Heuristics, sometimes it'll do better, and that's actually what SentinelOne captured were behaviors. SentinelOne said, yeah, you know what, nothing else adds up except that this thing is doing things that are impolite. All right? And then the thing that makes that more meaningful, that again is impossible to do with antivirus, against your baseline, what are the new behaviors? And we'll talk more about that in a minute. All right, bottom line is what? AV sucks, but you can't not do it, right? Now, every time I talk to developers about malware, there's a funny look that comes into most people's eyes. Not my problem. Not my problem. So the first time I told you OWASP became a part of PCI in 2003, I was leading the security team at DISH at that time. I was responsible for security and compliance, went into our VP of development, and I said, hey, your developers know what they're doing with this OWASP stuff, right? And my VP of development looked at me and said, you have firewalls. Keep us secure. And that was the answer, right? And who's going to argue with them? Developers do the same thing when you talk about stuff that's Trojaned, when you talk about malware. Hey, you security guys, keep the stuff safe. That ain't the way it works. I wish it did. Next slide, please. All right. Is there anybody who's never worked with a sandbox? Okay. So what is a sandbox designed to do? Well, if you could install your stuff on your own computer and test it, then you'd be fine, right? Well, you don't want to do that, so we'll just spin up an environment and we'll test and we'll take a look. There's a couple of problems with that, right? Sandboxes are what? Fast? Not so much. They're super accommodating for all kinds of file types? No, not so much. They're super good at unpacking stuff, right? Hey, it's zipped and then it's tarred and then it's RAR'd and then it's B-zipped 8 times over. What do most sandboxes do for that? They fail open. Hey, we're not going to look at it. We'll give you a report that says we didn't look at it. And you can set a policy that says pass fail. But if that thing is only going to go 7 layers deep, that's how deep it's going to go. So that's a problem with sandboxes. Another thing is bad guys do what? They adapt to controls that are designed to defeat them, right? So one of the customers I'm working with right now, one of their threats is an image file with clear instructions that are not computer readable. So it's a new kind of phishing. Hey, here's that image file. Open the image file. What could be wrong with that? There's nothing malicious about that file until you get to the instructions that tell you to go here and do this. Okay, well, that's a problem, right? But the reason that's a successful attack by and large is what? It relies on the human, and most humans don't participate in sandboxes, right? Okay. Did I lose anybody yet? We good? Okay. Malware writers are tuning it, right? SolarWinds is a classic example. 3CX is a classic example. What did the attack do? Did it execute immediately? No, I went to sleep. Hey, I'm harmless. I'm cool. Everything's fine. Don't worry about me. And does anybody not know who FireEye is? They defined the sandbox market. And they're the guys that named the SolarWinds update Sunburst because they also found out that they had been compromised by Sunburst. Okay, so the leader in the sandbox space, God bless them, they came forth and said, hey, we had a problem too. But if you think sandboxes are nirvana, you're probably not right. Any questions about any of that? So the thing I missed here is, do you have a sandbox that would take a 3CX update? Do you have a sandbox that would process a SolarWinds update? So it's not a good control, bottom line. It's great for some things and it's perfect for some things, and this ain't one of them. Next slide, please. All right. So if I know I had a clean release that didn't activate my webcam, for example, and my newest release of my text editing program activates my webcam, would that raise some questions? It might. It might. If I had a clean release that had a fully validated signature, and then I released something that had a partial signature, would I know it? And if I did know it, would that be a red flag? In this case, the answer is yes and yes. We do this a lot. But, you know, some of the things that come up, having the ability to do that diff, including behaviors, which Dave's going to talk about tomorrow, puts you in a position so that, look, man, I don't have to have the perfect sandbox session. I don't have to do the perfect reverse engineering. I don't have to have a hashed file component that matches the command and control segment of this other known malware. Don't have to have all that stuff. I have to be able to look at the behaviors and go, you know, we don't write software that does that. And now we can go all the way down the rabbit hole. So diff, one approach is repeatable builds. Has anybody tried that yet? Are you laughing, Matt? Are you laughing at repeatable builds?
2006.
2006 what? Repeatable builds?
We have repeatable builds.
Okay, and how's that working out?
Great.
Good. You're the only person I've met who's been able to say great. So I want to talk to you after, if that's okay. Okay, but that's the deal, right? Is that, hey, I can tell if I can do exactly the same thing twice, exactly the same way, byte for byte comparison, and it comes out the same. Either both pipelines are tampered with or neither one is, right? I mean, that's what repeatable builds give you. All right. So next slide, please, Tom. How we doing? Are we moving too fast? Just about right? Okay, good. Nobody's asleep. Is anybody asleep? Okay, good. All right. Fish don't know fish swim. So if you try to instrument within the pipeline and it's a compromised pipeline, is it possible you don't have the right perspective? Is it possible that you would need to actually divorce your instrumentation from a compromised component of your process. Fish don't know, fish swim. The answer is yes. So the way to approach that, hey, I've got my release artifact, and before I distribute it, I'm going to give it a final exam. That's an approach, right? If 3CX had done that, they would, if they had that capability to look at stuff as a final exam and do the diff, that was the big red flag. Hey, there's something different and it ain't right. It ain't the way we do things here. Next slide, please. All right. This is an AppSec conference. I've been doing AppSec conferences for an awful long time. And I think everything's the most important thing all the time, right? SQL injection is the most important thing all the time, right? But it's not. It's not an existential threat. If you Trojan your customers and you're a software manufacturer, you get to meet the board today. You know their names and you know, and then they know your name, right? The OWASP top 10 is important. Nobody wants to lose data. But if you Trojan your customers, all bets are off, all right? Other things that you need to check for, quick show of hands, who's AWS? Master key is on the net? Okay, just kidding. Yeah. Right. Why would you do that, right? Why would you not do that? The thing that we've seen, so if you look at CodeCov is a good example. Those guys had a release. They had their secrets published and released. The bad guys followed them home, contaminated the pipeline, and then what? Now your release is my release. You're publishing my malware for me. Thank you, CodeCov. Thank you for building that great distribution network. I don't have to write worms anymore. I just have to compromise software manufacturers. And that's what they're doing. Any questions about that? Okay, next slide, please, Tom. All right. You got repeatable builds right. So you've got the ability to say tampered or not tampered, right? Tampering is our future. And I'll tell you why. So if you look at what's in common between all of these, the manufacturing engine, the pipeline itself was compromised and the yield was something that was tampered with, right? But what else is going on? Is there anybody that writes code for a living that's not pulling down libraries? Anybody? Okay, let me rephrase that. Anybody writing code outside of the mainframe environment who's not pulling down libraries? You are pulling down libraries. What's the problem with that? So what we're seeing, NPM, PyPy, RubyGems, Maven, very common repos out there. And you're seeing what kind of attacks? Typo squatting, right? Basically, hey, look, I know everybody, just dumb it down all the way. I know everybody wants log4j, and they're pulling it down. I think it's something like 2 million pulled, or 2 million a day. That thing gets pulled, right? Okay. Well, if I know that, and I create something called log5j, and you're a developer, you think that probably might be a better version, right? It's log5j. It's got to be gooder, right? And it's just like log4j, but what's it got? It's got my stuff, right? So that's going on. That is happening. This is why SCA isn't enough. I don't care that the polluted version of log5j I just pulled down has the same vulnerability as yesterday's log4j. That's not the problem. The problem is this thing's been weaponized against me when I pulled it down. That's the problem, right? So that's our future. If you don't have a way to understand whether a library's been tampered with, you know, good luck. Can't help you. There's a couple of things, a couple of resources here that are kind of fun. As I understand it, I think this will get published. I think my deck gets published as a PDF after, right? So all the links that I show you, one of them, so we've started to capture NPM, right? Capture that repo and we share that data. So you're like, hey, is log5j an improvement, or is it just go and check? Check on find. Next slide, please, Tom. Is there anybody who didn't know that Windows would trust a partial signature? I didn't know that until 3CX broke. So that's what the bad guys did, right? This CVE, and if you look at it, Microsoft says we're not fixing it because we break stuff, right? What does that CVE describe? It describes the ability to sign a piece of a package that you define and say, hey, this first 80% is good. And have Windows go, oh, that signature says this is a good package. And that other 20% could be what? Anything. And in the case of 3CX, what was it? Stage 2 downloader. So if you didn't understand this and it matters to you, especially if you're on the operations side, there is a way to configure Windows operating systems not to trust partially signed packages. But if you're not looking for this and you're installing based on a good signature and you're not aware of the fact that good is apparently kind of a sliding scale, this is worth understanding. All right, next slide, please. Remember how we started? Remember how Sentinel-1 says, hey, this thing might be bad. And the coaching throughout the forum after that was, hey, this is a false positive. So 3CX, much like SolarWinds, can never tell their customers that's a false positive again without engaging in a antivirus vendor. If one of their customers holds up their hand and says, hey, you know, Billy Bob's antivirus says this thing's polluted, 3CX can't say diddly, only Billy Bob can. That make sense? That's a lesson from this, right? And if you look at this, if you look at these community threads, week after week, hey, I got another hit on this antivirus. You know, this says it's polluted. There is no defense for the vendor other than to be able to get that particular AV vendor to come back and say, no, we're good. So one of the things that you're going to want to test for if you're serious about this, and one of the capabilities you're going to want to have is, how would I know if my release is going to trigger an alert? Because once that's triggered, it's all hands on deck. Now you've got a support nightmare. Hey, one of our biggest customers says that their antivirus says that we're still polluted. Well, did you think anybody was going to work on anything else until that got resolved? So that's the important lesson there. Next slide, please. I'm a vendor. I started my life in operations. I founded a couple of OWASP chapters. I'm still chasing bucks. If you're getting breached, there are people who can help you and they will make money off of it. I hope to be one of them. But what you're looking for is partners, right? And so when you look on their forum on 3CX, you can see that they have their business partners weighing in. And they have people that made a difference for the better on those forums weighing in, right? Everybody wants your money when you get breached, period. Okay, then what is my test to weed out the money grubbers and the ambulance chasers from the people that can actually benefit me as I get back on my feet after having been knocked on my ass? Partners matter, right? One of the things that 3CX did that was really good, they put together a 7-step plan, said, hey, we are very sorry, everybody. This is how we're climbing out and making you whole. And they didn't do it alone. That's an important thing. Next slide, please, Tom. Hold that thought. Okay, click it. Doesn't look like that, but that is one of my favorite memes. Anybody need to see that one longer? Okay, good. Thanks, Tom. All right. You remember way back when this started, Nick Galea, the CEO of 3CX, got onto his forum and said, hey, gang, we do have a problem, and I'm very sorry. This is what we're doing about it. So I've worked in corporate America for a long time. I've worked with startups off and on for a long time. 3CX is a lot more like a startup than it is like Bank of America, right? One guy stood up and said, this is what we're doing, and laid it out for the customers. This is how it's going to be made whole. This is how we're doing this. One guy. So as somebody who's been a fairly successful creature in corporate America, I can't think of a single committee I've known or heard of that could do that. That could say, our committee thinks we need to come clean. What's that mean to you? Well, if you're with anything with any kind of size, what that means to you is you need to practice. If you don't have that one guy, you all better figure it out. And if you're smart, you'll pay money to consultants so they can be the bad guys, right? Because nobody on your committees wants to be the bad guy, but they're all very happy to have a consultant get paid to come in and say, you know, this Lewis kid is way out to lunch, but transparency did seem to work for somebody else. Well, those guys suck. Those guys suck. But we paid them. Okay, good. The other thing that I've seen in corporate America is you put together these committees, these risk committees, and legal and HR and marketing show up, and what are they doing? Oh, yeah, go ahead. I'm totally paying attention. Right? They need to treat it like it's game day. Because if this happens and it's game day and they've been goofing off and you don't have that one guy who can stand up, you're going to have a problem. Any questions about this? Okay. Is this all too obvious? Yeah. It took a lot of thought. This, I think, is, in my opinion, this is the biggest conclusion. Is that if you don't have somebody who can stand up and lead during an existential threat, somebody, you may not survive. All right. So I've put together a bunch of Google searches at the end of this, and I'd encourage you to read the blogs. So if you want to get serious about preparing for this kind of event, there are resources out there. You don't have to relive history. Next slide, please, Tom. Next slide, please. What would stop you from doing that? We've gone through 9 super good lessons. What would stop you from putting them to work? Right? First one, always normalcy bias, right? This only happens to those bastards called 3CX or SolarWinds or CodeCov or Circle CI, but not me, right? The other thing that comes up is, hey, you know what? Nobody's asking for this. Well, the federal government said they're asking for it. They just haven't made it stick yet. We were on a call with a federal provider, a contractor, not too long ago. And we're like, hey, this executive order requiring SBOMs and all that, how's that? Like, we have contracts for the next 3 years that say I don't have to give them that. So I'm not giving it to them. Okay, you can't argue with that, right? I'm not a lawyer. But at some point, what's going to come down the pike? Think about this. One of the things about GDPR, for example, is that there's a requirement to follow best practices. And if you don't have that documented, then you've lost a critical element of defense if the EU is coming after you for your breach. Everybody understand that? So the other thing, PCI is going to do it. We don't have a supply chain top 10 yet. We got 2 controls that are kind of close. Am I wrong, Matt? Okay, good. There is no quadrant. Forrester doesn't have a wave, and I don't need to update my resume. Those are all things that'll work against you, right? Can you be different? Next slide, please, Tom. Right. Can you do this? Right now, can you do this? One guy in the room, one guy in my history of talking about this can do a reproducible build. One guy. Can you? Can you do that? What about understanding changes build to build? What if you were able to see the red flag that was the phone home to China that wasn't there last time? What if you're able to see the red flag that is the partially signed package, right? What if you're able to see the behavioral differences that Dave's going to touch on where, hey, do we always go ahead and download malware from China as a second step of the install? Maybe that should be looked into. Do you look for malware? And do you do it in a way where you're going all the way down the rabbit hole? Remember, guys, I have a lot of respect for FireEye, but they got burned by SolarWinds. Why? Because it doesn't go all the way down the rabbit hole, rip everything apart, and find the answers, right? Same thing, secrets detections. If I say canaries, does anybody want to explain that to everybody else, what a canary is? Okay, so if you're looking for secrets, and if I'm somebody that wants to put stuff out there that would lead me to bad people, what's better than having a completely random string that happens to look like a big fat AWS API key, and then just search the internet and the dark web to see when that string pops up, right? It's a canary. What does it mean? It means whoever popped that thing up is looking at my stuff, right? So that's a canary. Can you do that? What about if you publish your private debug files? I've heard that's bad. Maybe I'm wrong. All right. And then we talked about SBOM. We talked about that a little bit. Remember, when I'm driving the truck, the manifest is meaningless to me except for 2 instances, right? But in those 2 instances, it's very important, and the paperwork has to match what's on the truck. Same thing. If I'm building an SBOM based on what's intended to be in the package, and that doesn't match the release, what's the problem? You don't know what's in the package. Next slide, please, Tom. All right. So this is a way of laying all that out, right? So what do we got? SCA, SAS, DAST, and then Utopia. We call it reversing labs. You can call it Utopia. But that's what we do, right? And these are the things, any questions on any of this stuff? Because I think we've talked about almost all of this. Okay, good. All right, next slide, please. Okay, next. It's all secure all the time until Groundhog Day. Next. All right. These are the dork strings. I'll leave this up for a minute. Okay, next. Any questions? How are we doing on time, Tom? Oh, good. Sweet. No questions? Man, that was awesome, wasn't it? So comprehensive, unbelievable. Okay, very cool. All right, guys, so Dave and Matt are both talking tomorrow. If you want to understand more about software supply chain, because you're not the one person in this room that could make repeatable builds happen for you successfully, those guys can help you. We'll also be at the API Cyber Conference on November 7th. Matt, could you do me a favor, stand up and just wave at everybody real quick? This is Matt Reynolds. He is my personal hero. If you want help, he or I will help you. That's pretty much all I got, unless anybody's got any questions. Last chance. All right, thanks everybody.